I'm Shania.
And I'm Tom.
Welcome to Spotlight New Zealand. Tonight we focus on one of New Zealand's greatest tragedies, the sinking of the Wahine.
Throughout tonight's show, we will try to find out as much as possible about the disaster, so as the nation can understand this terrible tragedy.
On the morning the 10th of April 1968, after an overnight voyage in Lyttelton, the ferry Wahine encountered the worst of a violent southerly storm, with winds gusting 160 km per hour while entering the Wellington harbour with passengers terrified and feeling very ill indeed. The captain and his crew attempted to get their ship back to on course and out of danger. After many hours, the passengers and crew had to abandon the ship and were flung out into the rough seas of the harbour on life rafts. They had to make their perilous crossing to Wellington's rocky shores, where they were met by local Wellingtonians desperate to help. These resources could see the state of the harbour and understood how difficult the crossing had become. Perhaps even more, those on board realised. We were lucky enough tonight to have footage recovered from residency of the side village. Espioned back in 1968, they were among many historic resources on that fateful day. Here's Wellington correspondent Georgia with her 1968 report.
Hello, I'm Georgia, and here we have Rose, a very heroic rescuer. Thank you for joining us today. You must be exhausted. What were you doing when the Wahine hit the rocks?
I was sleeping and I heard a big noise that woke me up. It sounded like huge waves, so I got up and went outside.
How were you helping the passengers?
I saw many people who were struggling in a huge surf and cold water, so I went out and helped them ashore.
What did you see in the harbour?
Huge waves. Because of the spray, you can really not see anything. There was lots of people who were trying to, and they needed help.
Thank you. Signing off on this, a very bleak day in New Zealand's history.
An interesting interview. Thanks to Grandma Franklin for sending us the old report. Those unfortunate enough to be in the Wahine on the 10th of April. With very rough night and day, many passengers were thrown up cautiously on the extremely rough seas. The passengers were all told the storm would pass and they'll hold tight. So it was a typical Wellington southerly storm, and would ride it out. Unfortunately, at 6:41 a.m, the Wahine was carried into the rocks of Barrett Reef, seriously damaged to the hull. That's right, to us landlubbers and the port that's left. Engines stopped working, anchors were dropped, but it was some time before they held firm. Rescue attempts were made impossible by the raging gales, massive swells. By early afternoon, all 734 crew, passengers and crewmen ship and get into the life rafts. Only 4 of 8 rafts could be used. Because the angle of the ship, now sinking ship, to escape. But due to the stormy seas, 51 lost their lives. We can only imagine that those giant and their small rafts were worst of the film. Our film technicians have found some damage to survivors filmed only hours after disaster in civil defence shelter. We have carefully cleaned and restored the film. This is first been shown to New Zealand public.
Hello, how are you? Are you okay? You look freezing. Well, we're rolling. Right. I'm Rebecca, and joining us today is Daniel, from one of the survivors from today's disaster. How did you get off the ferry?
I jumped into the nearest lifeboat I could, get away as fast as I can.
Did anything tragic happen as you were on your way to shore?
We hit the lifeboat hit the rocks, and I fell out and got a huge scar across my face.
What were you thinking when the boat tipped?
I need to get off this boat.
Fair enough. And we're out of time. Let's get this brave lad a coffee.
Thank you for incredible storm. It must have been...
Well, that's all we have for you this evening. We hope you learnt something.
No, story free.
Story time. A fantastic piece of New Zealand history. We are so lucky to have such an amazing technology that still allows us to view it. And now, let us look at the human error being the possible reason for the sinking of the Wahine. Captain Hector Gordon Robertson had been the master of an ill-fated ferry for some time. He had sailed to her and from Wellington numerous times in the strong winds and high seas, and it was experienced. It was in Captain Robertson's decision to enter the harbour when they did. They had arrived 20 minutes behind schedule when the three guests of 100 knots or more struck the vessel, and more of them put out to line. He was quoted at this time, saying, "If those who wind had struck 5 minutes later, they would have been through the entrance and could have come down the harbour. We could have had some and dropped down an anchor in Oriental Bay, where it was quite calm." Some people suggested that Captain Robertson was too late in his decision to put the passengers onto life rafts. They had suggested they should only have been encouraged much earlier. Captain Robertson, however, feels he made the right decision, saying people who they don't know what they are talking about. If I had put them off any earlier, everyone would have been lost. I would have 600 lives on my consequence. In a moment we will take a closer look at the weather on that fateful day, but now let's look at an interview given by Cully in 1972. This interview may give us some insights as to what is happening on the bridge that day.
Hello, I'm Kelly, and joining me now is Shay, the Wahine's first officer. What was your reaction when you realised the boat was sinking and there was probably no way of stopping it?
My first thought was for the passengers' safety and how we could get them all off the ship.
Was there ever a chance to save the vessel and the ship?
No way. Once the wind got her and she struck the rock, it was all over.
How did you feel when you heard how many people had died?
I just wondered if there could have been another way to save my life.
This is Wahine's first officer, and thanks for your time.
Yeah. Let's look at the weather on 10th of April 1968. It's certainly... Calm down, man! The hell? Fascinating old footage there. Let's look at the weather on 10th of April 1968. It certainly was a terrible day to be struck outside in New Zealand.
Cyclone Gazelle was the first reported on the 5th of April 1968 when it hit French Caledonia, with storm warnings issued throughout New Zealand for the next day. Early on the 9th of April, Cyclone Gazelle hit Cape Reinga. Winds of up to 160 kilometres per hour caused massive damage to buildings. Torrential rain flooded farmland in Northland, drowning hundreds of farm animals. A farmer was also killed when he was blown off a haystack. The cyclone's pattern of damage continued as it travelled through the North Island but turned south down the east coast. Ships were driven ashore and landslips closed roads. Rain caused massive flooding and wind left roofs torn off or broken and windows broken. By the time Cyclone Gazelle hit Wellington on the morning of the 10th of April, another storm had driven up the west coast of the South Island from Antarctica. The two storms met over the capital, causing huge damage. Winds in Wellington were the strongest ever recorded, at one point reaching speeds of 275 kilometres an hour. As the storm moved onto the South Island, hundreds of Christchurch houses lost their roofs and both the Avon and Heathcote rivers flooded. Throughout Canterbury, over 500 hectares of forests were destroyed. In the South Island, the flooding was worst since 1913, and some people were stranded on the roofs of their houses and had to be rescued by jet boat. Cyclone Gazelle finally blew out somewhere in the Southern Ocean.
And there you have it, folks. Perhaps if weather forecast could have been then what it is now, the Wahine disaster would never have happened. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you. What an incredible storm it must have been.
Well, that's all we have for this evening. We hope you have learnt something about our country's history and about one of the darkest days. Please join us next week. Focus on the Springboks Tour 1981.
Thank you for all you watching and see you again next time.